These days I've thought a lot. I've thought a lot about the way I feel about you. I've thought a lot. These days I've got a lot of reason to doubt you, yet to live without you. I've never been much of a poet. I never could touch with words like you. I've always just thought that we should say things how we see them. The sun is hot, the sky is blue. But suddenly I'm out of words, I'm out of words. Suddenly I'm out of words, I'm out of words. This is bigger and brighter and wider than I ever knew.
Hello, and welcome to When Music Meets Mindfulness. I'm your host, Vanya Chan. I'm very excited to chat with our featured guest today, Britta Johnson, composer, lyricist, and writer. Her award-winning musical, Life After, just finished a successful run at the CAA Ed Mirvish Theater, and I had the great fortune of catching a show. I got the program right here, and it completely blew my mind, and it warmed and broke my heart at the same time. So Britta has many writing credits to her name, including collaborations with her sister, Britta Johnson, and most recently, Britta was the co-creator of Tim Hortons' 60th anniversary musical, The Last Timbit. I think that's such a great title. She was the inaugural crescendo artist with the musical stage company and was named one of 50 to watch by the Broadway Women's Fund of America. So Britta, it's such a pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, except that the weather is miserable. But other than that, I'm great.
Yeah,
How are
yeah.
you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yes, it's gloomy weather outside, but I'm glad to see that you're here and happy to have you here. And that just brightens up today already, so thank you.
I'm very pleased to be here.
So it's hard to believe that it was like years ago when we first met through Jumbly's theater production. We were workshopping a cartoon opera called The View from Here by Norbert Palej. Yeah,
Yes,
I think that
yes.
was it. Yeah. So that was years ago, but it's so wonderful to see you again and to hear about all your successes. And as I've told you many times already, I'm a big fan of your musical writing style. So just excited to talk to you today. Yeah. So let's begin our first topic, calming the mind. So what are some activities that you feel help calm your mind, heighten awareness, and bring your focus to the present moment? It could be meditation, listening to music, or taking a walk, and they could be in relation to your preparation for a musical project, or could just relate to daily routines and tasks.
I wish I could say I had more of a fixed routine than I do, but I am a big believer in a long walk. I have a dog, which has been a blessing to me because I start every day by going to the park for about an hour, which really has changed my mental health in a pretty amazing way. And I'm a big believer in a long bike ride. I love biking to Mimico and back is my favorite thing to do. And mostly I just always, as far as writing music goes, I think so much of writing looks like not writing. It's about kind of like staying present, like keeping the channel open, but allowing yourself to do other things, to listen to other music, to take long walks, to I believe in many repetitive actions. Like that's why it's often on my bike that I think of my best ideas. And when I first started writing in high school, and it was when I was a busser at a very fancy restaurant where most of my job was cutting bread in the basement. And something about like keeping my hands busy and not being otherwise occupied, but having a repetitive kind of meditative motion, I do think is responsible for my whole career because that's where I first started to write my first weird little projects. So I've carried the wisdom of the bread with me into the rest of my career. I think that my best ideas came cutting the bread. So sometimes when I'm stuck, I'm like, what's today's version of cutting the bread, of like again, not trying to distract myself, keeping the channel open, but something kind of low impact, repetitive, that keeps my body in motion and keeps my mind open. Usually that's where ideas begin, not kind of actually at the piano, is what I would say.
I love that. That's fantastic. And it's strange how we often can find access to our creativity by taking a break from the actual artistic action itself and doing something else, and just removing our brain from the stress of must get something on blank paper, right? It There's something about
Yeah.
the repetitiveness of something else that cleanses the mind.
Mhm.
Let's move on to our second topic, organizing our thoughts. So I want to talk about your critically acclaimed musical, Life After. It has become popular knowledge that you wrote the music, lyrics, and the book for this musical. It's the complete trifecta. And so could you give an overview of your creative process for Life After in particular? How did you juggle your three creative roles throughout the development of this musical?
In truth, the fact that I wear all three hats is simply because I started writing it before I knew any better. I didn't know that people didn't do that. I started writing it when I was a teenager still. It's one of my very first projects, and it's like truly grown up with me. And I think because of its subject matter, because it's not the most plot driven work, although there is a plot that hangs it together and gives it a sense of momentum, it is really about dropping into these like important, kind of poignant and truthful moments, often funny, but then some often very sad. So I wrote it. It was kind of a scattershot in process. It started as just a few songs that I didn't, that were really just about me trying to sort through some very complicated feelings. As the plot started to grow, then it's interesting, we have this visual behind me that I haven't taken this down yet, because this is a huge part of my process when I write alone, because I'm not a super plot driven or linear writer, but I write a lot of different moments, and if I get it out of my head and in front of me with a color coding system and all of these things, this has been on my wall for like a year, and this is the current draft of Life After, and I guess I'm in denial that it's over because I haven't taken it down yet, or maybe I haven't figured out what to do with this wall. But usually when I write alone, the blessing is that I don't have to explain my ideas to anyone other than myself, so I can kind of go where the journey takes me. And the process of this has always been kind of all over the place, and about cracking different moments or finding different ways to weave motif. It's not even about starting a song and writing till it's finished. It's about kind of building the tapestry of the show. So this visual process has been a huge part of that for me. I've had other versions of this on my wall before, where there's like, when I'm trying to figure out like the motivic development, there's color coding for different like sonic textures, but this is you're looking at the plot one right here, where I think it's like green is song and purple is scene. Anyway, so this is always a huge part of my process, and even I've brought it by necessity. It's when I work alone, because my process is so all over the map and hard to follow, but I've brought it into many of my collaborations too, even when I'm working with people who have a greater access to linear thought than I do. Still, I find putting it on the wall is a very useful thing to kind of look at the structure of what you're doing. I've been asked, like, do I prefer working alone or do I prefer working in a team? Like, I couldn't possibly say. There are such pros and cons to both. And often the pros and cons are kind of the same thing, which is like, it is both a pro and a con that I don't have to explain myself to anyone when I'm working alone. Whereas sometimes the greatest discoveries when I'm working on a team is that step where I have to explain myself to someone else, where the idea has to live outside of me for a moment, and I have to see if it makes sense, or I have to see earlier on how it's being received, and if they're receiving what my intention is.
Let me move on to the next question here, about Frank, the father character. I found it very unique and interesting that you presented him as a celebrated self-help author, and I was two of the musical numbers highlighted self-help wisdom, control what you can and forgive yourself. And I've heard these concepts, that promote personal growth through self-reflection, and which is, I think, linked to organizing one's thoughts. So could you elaborate on why you chose to incorporate these self-help themes within the musical?
Yeah, I mean, the show is by no stretch of the imagination autobiographical. It's not my family that you're seeing on stage, but the initial songs, or like the initial impulse to write it, came from some back-to-back kind of life-changing losses that happened to me as a teenager, one of which was the loss of my dad. And as I was kind of building the texture of this show, which is really kind of a first person narrative. You're like living in the mind of the 16-year-old. You see and feel you're kind of living in her imagination. It did end up feeling like a kind of useful ingredient, because I found in walking through grief as a young person, that influx of all of this new language, or these very adult ways that we formulate kind of structures for ourselves to cope with grief, I found them so alienating as a young person, because it's kind of only on the other side of something that you understand, that you can kind of weave that narrative for yourself about what was useful or what isn't, or what meaning you can ascribe to it. And when you're in that first moment of chaos of a grieving young person, when it's kind of just like the initial cracking open of the world, it made me feel like I was grieving wrong, or I was doing it wrong. And the show is really about this young person who feels like the world has the ability to move on when she doesn't. And although weaving in all of these self-help things, there's so much truth in them, and it's not that the words are empty, they are correct, but her kind of battling up against them in the chaos, or finding new ways to find meaning in them through the chaos. It's like I wrote it initially thinking it was the tongue-in-cheek, that I was kind of taking the piss out of self-help, and now that I'm older and I've gone through it more, I kind of understand the wisdom of some of these old adages that we use to help us get through things. But there's something about it being a texture, this kind of very adult way of talking about grieving for a young person who doesn't kind of understand that yet, that felt like a kind of useful foil for her as she's trying to find meaning in this the very first time something's been taken from her before she was ready. But I will say, like, in walking through this process at Mirvish, it was like definitely one of the scariest things I've ever done. It's like the largest audience my show has ever been shown to. It's my hometown. The pressure was on. It's my first commercial production. And I really found myself saying a lot of these things in the show, like control what you can, let go of the rest, like all of these motifs around self-forgiveness. I really was like, oh, I thought this was tongue-in-cheek, and it is correct, and it is useful. Like, and kind of that is the thing about the self-help world. There's a lot of use in finding, logic and systems or containers for these big chaotic things that we walk through. But it was just an initial impulse when I first put it in, and it's been such an interesting thing to play with in every draft, and something that my relationship with it has also changed as I've grown, which has been very interesting.
And I definitely saw how those kinds of little bits of wisdom, how each character in your musical utilized it, or sort of the mom character in particular was very impactful for me, I thought. And I guess this segues into sort of our third topic in the interview now, which is the state of flow. I would describe you as a singer's composer. And what I mean by that is that you're inherently sensitive to the human vocal instrument, and you write musical lines that flow with the natural rise and fall of the human voice. I know that you're a singer yourself, and I believe that influences and guides your writing style. Flow is the state of consciousness in which the mind-body connection has been finely tuned to the point that performance seems effortless and spontaneous and enjoyable. And there are two pieces that I found very captivating. Wallpaper, sung by Beth, the mother character, and of course Poetry, sung by Alice, the main teenage character. And both are dramatic and poignant pieces, and they take us on a narrative and emotional journey. I feel like you carefully crafted these pieces in a way that serves the performers, and it allows them to unlock that state of flow, that sort of effortless delivery in the present moment, and it connects them to their characters in every show. I could feel the rush of energy from the performers, and I was a mess. Like, I was a mess for a lot of the whole show, but particularly for those two pieces. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Like, I looked around, everyone was just sobbing and all these things.
Unfortunately, I love to hear that. I love it. Yeah.
I'm glad. It's like, it's effective. It worked, and everyone was connected together. Like, and we could feel that sort of energy in the audience. Everyone was in that moment together. So, so could you share how you composed these two pieces? Like, what helped guide your creative instinct in the development of these two particular pieces and essentially these two characters?
It's an interesting set of songs to choose to describe, because they're kind of how they exist in the show is so, or at least in the story of the writing of the show, is so different, because Poetry was one of the very first songs I wrote for the show. It's one of the very first songs I wrote in my life, and I didn't know that it was for a show. It came from a very authentic moment of profound loss for me, where I was just sitting at the piano, and and this song kind of came out about trying to figure out something that there's no words for. And so I think I'm finding an authentic flow state as a composer is like the greatest task of a composer, especially now that I've professionalized as a composer. Is like so much of what I do is to try to set myself up to get to that state, like eating the right thing in the day, or taking the right walk, or listening to the right music, because you can tell when you're in the channel and you can tell when you aren't. And when you're not in the channel, there's not a lot that can happen, not a lot of good work that can happen. And so that was a moment of like, just by chance, I was in the channel by the fact that I was in that position, and I was using song to try to figure out how to write it. And I didn't show anyone for a very long time, and I didn't know. And then as I started to think I was maybe going to write a show, it was kind of like, oh, it seems like that might be the landing point. It seems like this is maybe what the show is about. It's me extrapolating on that initial impulse, which is like, how do I find a way to bring an audience into the experience of grief, which is kind of indescribable and kaleidoscopic and complicated and so many layers at once. So, and that's always been the final song of the show. It's always where the show has grown out of. Now, Wallpaper came when I knew that what I was doing was writing a musical. It was still from a very early draft, but at least I knew I was trying to find narrative and character, and I was writing for a character that at that point, because I was still a teenager when I wrote it, was very outside of I'd never renovated a room, I'd never mothered a child, I still haven't. And like, as far as grieving from a point of like the person holding all that responsibility and what's cracking open for her, I had to find a different way into that character, which for me often is like, you really have to kind of try the character on. At least, you can see my window here, like my neighbor can see into my office, and I think he thinks I'm out of my mind because I'm often like pacing around, muttering to myself, like monologuing as the character. Sometimes I'll record myself monologuing as the character. And I remember when I was trying to crack open this moment for Beth, the thing I kept repeating was this motif of, I'm sorry I had to, I'm sorry I had to, I'm sorry I tried to wait. And I heard the repetition of that, and I heard the rhythm of that, which is like this kind of tumbling triplet duple feel that the rest of the song spilled out of. And so it was really through for that, like trying to channel this character, that got me kind of into that channel, and then the song spilled out from there.
Sorry I had to, I just had to, I'm sorry I tried to wait. But I had to, I just had to, and it couldn't be up for debate. Because the paper was pink, the paper was floral, it was oppressive and strange. The paper was pink, and the accents were choral, and it needed to change. I needed the change.
I'm a really big believer in, I write from the piano, and I write as a singer. I really try it on in my body. Yeah, so it's like interesting, like you figure out strategies, like poetry just came, from the sky as a, I didn't know I was looking for a song, and that happens once in every 10 years to me, But now that I do this for a living, or I knew I was writing a song, Wallpaper, I had to kind of employ some strategies, and that went well. And I cracked it quite early. As soon as I found that rhythm, that rhythmic motif, the rest of the song found its way very, very easily. It was another flow. There are some songs that are quite muscled in writing, and they take a long time, to find their way. And that one didn't take long at all. I will say it didn't take long at all. Sometimes if that's not happening, if I'm bashing my head against the wall, it usually means I'm maybe not writing the right song, or maybe I'm not finding the right way into the song, or maybe the song isn't the most authentic song for the character in that moment, and I have to try a different way. And usually when I change my tactic, then that's when I find it.
Yeah, I was talking to another composer friend of mine. We were talking about that internal compass, that sort of composer's compass, creator's compass that tells you sort of just instinctually, like a gut feeling, oh, that this is the right direction or it's not. And that's also part of the flow process in being attuned to your gut feeling of what works, what doesn't. And I think it's fascinating what you just shared, because I definitely was impacted by that repetition. just when Beth comes out and she just that rhythm, that repetition, I think it draws everyone into the song immediately. Like it cracked it for you to be drawn into the composing of it, but it has an equal kind of effect on us listening, the way that we tumble into it with her. I thought it was fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. And it's like it's a unique song because there's some songs where like you meet you meet Beth at like at a 10. Like she's already well into the scene when she starts to sing, which is like a quite exciting place to start a song without having to introduce anything. We're just dropped right in, and I'm always like the most excited about that, just kind of like dropping in at the moment of highest stakes for any character and not wasting any time, you know?
As you said, you dropped Beth in at the highest moment of emotion for her. And just sort of like the structure of the whole piece, you said that these were all moments kind of cobbled together in some way, but still give that narrative and that realization of the plot and the story. Like, and I love the moments of humor too, in the sense that like we knew, like the audience knew coming in that this was a heavy topic, that this is something that it's difficult to face for a lot of people, but we all do, and that's what interconnects us. But we were sort of swept away with the whole ups and downs of life, the humor of it really sort of, I mean, a lot of it coming from Frank himself too, the character that is really more of a memory than anything else. Like how did that come about, knowing to sort of balance that heavy material with something without it being, I don't want to use the word disrespectful, but in some ways there is that danger of perhaps losing the main point of the story, but you didn't. It just felt like it just embraced the whole thing in a wonderful package of acceptance.
I mean, what I was trying to do is create something that feels close to what grieving feels like, and to do so honestly. It's very hard to capture. It's such a heightened state of being. You're existing in past and present and speculated future. You're existing in fantasy and nightmare, and also the reality, mundane, day-to-day of life continues, which feels impossible. And there's such absurdity in that and humor in that. So in order to be truthful about grief, I think we have to talk about the kaleidoscopic nature of grief, which is that a lot of it is very funny, and people behave in a very funny way around it. And the way that regular life collides with these massive existential questions is very funny. Like the way that you still have to get up and do regular stuff alongside this, but also these floodgates of all these strangers who have access to you is open, and the way that makes everyone uncomfortable and no one knows quite exactly what to say. And especially that colliding with like teenage life, there's so much humor to be found in that. And I think that if I were to create a show that just lived in the dour, it wouldn't be the truth. I just don't think that's the truth. And I think what we're trying to do is like reach out our hand and say like, hey, you're not alone. We all go through this. This is our best attempt at what this experience, what this week feels like for this girl. And so it's always been very important to me that the show is funny, because in all of the saddest moments of my life, some of the funniest things happen.
Thank you once again for being here, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this music and mindfulness series. I really enjoyed just catching up with you, and thank you for letting me pick your brain about this. It's been very illuminating for me, and just wonderful to hear about your creative writing process. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that there'll be an opportunity for us to collaborate musically in the near future. Even a jam session would be a blast.
I'd love that.
That would be wonderful. To our audience, thank you for tuning in. See you next time on When Music Meets Mindfulness.
Losing is confusing. What once was black and white has turned to gray, all different shades so strange and new. And there's a certain poetry in knowing you, a certain poetry in losing you, a certain poetry in knowing not a single word or phrase could ever do. Not for you, because my former logic won't apply. When it feels like rain and yet the ground is dry, and when I love you but but I hate you, and I can't articulate exactly why. I've never been much of a poet. I never could touch with words like you.